to exist as one mankind across all races. When speaking about Scientology, words like faith and belief are often avoided in lieu of concrete terms based on science and technology. Once you are clear, meaning you've been cleansed of traumatic memories and feelings, you are able to climb the ladder to more meaningful and powerful positions. After clear comes a state called operating thetan, or OT for short. This allows you to control the world around you, including life, energy, and matter. They can also leave their bodies, as the thetan itself is not confined to it. There are many levels of operating thetan, and it costs money through the auditing process to progress. The cheapest level is $2,750 about, and that's assuming you're free of those memories and feelings. Otherwise, you'll have much more auditing to do before this. The third level of OT involves a major discovery that Hubbard discovered after Scientology had been founded. While people reaching this level have signed confidentiality agreements, some of these documents have been released to the public, and it tells a story that again causes a pretty major controversy. Okay, bear with me. 75 million years ago, an ancient being called Xenu was a dictator of something called the Galactic Confederacy. He brought humans to Earth, dropped them into volcanoes, and killed them, releasing their thetans into the environment. These thetans are angry and upset, causing us now to be infected and affected by these negative emotions. To overcome these negative emotions from this traumatic event is how you can reach OT level 3, but it's dangerous. L. Ron Hubbard claims that it's a tough thing to do, and many illnesses might plague people attempting to conquer it. The church itself doesn't enjoy the telling of the story, and will go out of its way to block its telling, so if this video disappears, or if I go missing, that may be the reason why. This story was the focus of an episode of South Park centering on Scientology.
What is the most secret part of Scientology or thing that they worry about leaking?
Well, you know that stuff about the aliens and the volcanoes?
I don't know what is that?
Oh, gosh.
It's like the whole basis of Scientology.
Yeah, well, you don't know about that when you're in Scientology until you reach a certain level. Like, you have to receive a certain amount of training and counseling, and it can take years, and, you know, the public Scientologist has to pay a lot of money before they get there.
The total to get to this point through the process of auditing is around $100,000. If you don't become enlightened and don't solve these life mysteries, you must pay to try the process again.
By the way, most Scientologists don't even get to this.
Most
don't.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, because you have to be wealthy to get to this.
Not only do you have to be wealthy, but a lot of times what they do, the new scam is you got to go, you get to a level and then they go, we messed that up, you have to go back down at your expense.
While the church doesn't come out and discuss Xenu in this incident, volcanoes do feature prominently on the covers of Dianetics. Now, another controversy arrives in the form of taxes, and if Scientology should actually be considered a religion by the IRS. The IRS tried to claim back taxes in the 60s, but the church responded with thousands of lawsuits against the IRS, resulting in about 25 years of back and forth litigation, eventually resulting in the decision that Scientology was indeed a church and exempt from taxes. Now, by the time this landmark decision was made, L. Ron Hubbard had passed away. The church's official statement was that he no longer needed his physical body, but he continued to write and research without it. This was in 1986, and a man named David Miscavige took over the church. A lot of claims have come out against Miscavige, including violence and abuse towards church members, but nothing has been substantiated. Something notable that happened around the time of the leadership change was the rise in the celebrity Scientologists, prime examples to help recruit others. First came John Travolta, then Tom Cruise, and they are the two most well-known. But many other Hollywood types came to Scientology, able to pay for these auditing sessions that would relieve them of past traumas. But what people don't think about is that these auditing sessions, essentially counseling, covering their deepest, darkest secrets, are all kept in records. So each member of the church has a file that can be used at any time to either discredit them or blackmail them. This might be the reason that people stay in the church or don't tell the truth when asked. Now, this is already a long video, but if you're interested in more supposed testimony, there are a few documentaries that go into much more depth, including Going Clear, available now on HBO. So as you can see, this is complicated. An international network that is given religious status in the US, but other countries it's defined as a dangerous cult. We've got former members of the church claiming some horrible things, but there is no evidence. They believe in the immortal soul and its endless capability, but beyond that are some pretty bizarre extraterrestrial origins that people can find difficult to believe. In the comments, let me know your thoughts about Scientology, and we'll see you next week for another What Is video about an interesting topic. Thanks for watching.
I don't know if he kept saying these have never been substantiated and there is no evidence for legal reasons, but just so you know, testimony is evidence. It has the same weight in a court of law. It's used differently, and sometimes you need other evidence to corroborate testimony or multiple witnesses. But right now, there are many witnesses. So they talk about, okay, David Miscavige has been accused of violence, but it's never been corroborated, or never been substantiated. Well, there are eyewitnesses to people, multiple eyewitnesses to this violence. One of them said, I saw David Miscavige punch somebody in the mouth in a meeting. And this is, I'm not saying this is out there. You know, you can go and just type in his name and punch in the mouth, and Google will take you there. So anyways, backing up a little, Dianetics became a bestseller, pretty big bestseller, soon after its publication. By the way, the people began actually setting up Dianetics groups around the country to try to work out the practices of what the book was saying. Since it claimed to be about the science of mental health, the American Psychological Association became involved. The APA stated that there was no evidence supporting the claims of Dianetics. Other people made some really harsh statements, including well-known psychoanalysts and so on. Scientology has been an implacable foe of psychology ever since. And I think the most famous example of that was when Tom Cruise attacked, verbally, over, I don't know, in social media or something, Brooke Shields, when she said she was taking an antidepressant and seeing a psychologist. And I think a few years later he actually apologized for that, but it was pretty nasty for a while. He was pretty nasty. Maybe his PR guy said, this is really hurting your chances for the next Mission Impossible movie. I don't know. But in any case, there's so much to cover that this was, to me, the best way to approach it, to simply find an existing timeline that was out there that would hit the real big highlights. So you can see that he establishes this foundation in 1951 called the Hubbard Dianetic Research Foundation. That's not technically the church yet. That comes a little later. Right here, February 1954, Church of Scientology founded in Los Angeles. 2 years later, they get U.S. federal tax exempt status. These years in the 60s are pretty significant. The release of the Hubbard Mark II e-meter, followed by the Hubbard Mark III e-meter. This is this device that's supposed to tell, the E stands for engram, and engrams are supposed to be these things inside of you that are the result of trauma, things in your brain. It's recorded trauma. And after you pay $100,000 or so, you might find out that you have trauma from a past life because of what those aliens did, and those poor Thetans that were dropped into the volcano, and their spirits have come into you and haunted you. So, of course, by that time, you're pretty deep into Scientology, and you're pretty persuaded if you've spent that much money. So, in any case, the e-meter is one of the devices that apparently is supposed to detect these things. In 1966, they founded Narconon. A lot of people have heard of that, and maybe you've heard good things about it. It's for addicts. It is an alternative to Alcoholics Anonymous or any of them. It's actually designed mostly for narcotics. It's right there in the name. But it's all based on the principles of Dianetics. So, which I'm told by psychologists have virtually no standing in terms of research or anything else. Here in 1967 is when the IRS decided, no, you're not really a religion, we're going to take your tax-exempt status away. Now, a phrase that comes up every once in a while is this phrase, Sea Org. Stands for Sea Organization. The Sea Org people are the inner circle. These are the most committed, the most dedicated Scientologists. These will probably be the ones who, if they want to go after somebody and have a picket or harass, they will go to the Sea Org. I hear it's virtually, for a long time it was considered virtually impossible to leave the Sea Org. I think that has since been disproven. People have managed to get out of it. In '86, Hubbard dies after suffering a stroke. The official line, of course, is he doesn't need his body anymore. He's going to continue all of his activities in a higher plane. They founded this organization, IAS, International Association of Scientologists, to try to firm up their international network. I don't know how big it is, but one of their first things that they did was they presented a Freedom Medal to Scientologists John Travolta, Debbie Mace, and Jerry Boswell at the annual convention aboard a ship that they own. So as you notice, there's a lot less to report. There's so much that this is even leaving out during the Hubbard years. But after Hubbard dies, really the main headlines turn out to not be so much about new innovations and new organizations being founded, but they tend to be mostly about David Miscavige and his temper and the way he treats people and people trying to leave. That tends to be most of the headlines. In 1993, they get their tax-exempt status back. In 2005, he starts ridiculing psychology and psychiatry, calls it evil and all kinds of other things. So this is just a very broad sweep timeline. We have one more video to show, but before we do that, we'll note that L. Ron Hubbard divorced again in 1951 and was married to his third wife, who he married in 52 when he died at the age of 74 in 1986. His successor turned out to be even more notorious than he was, not because of the weird beliefs as much as the behavior, as I said earlier. And this gentleman's name is David Miscavige. He is still in charge of Scientology, and that's what this next video is about. It's a little bit shorter than the previous one.
The Church of Scientology has dealt with many high-profile defectors, including celebrities and former top executives. But what you're about to see is truly unique. The father of the undisputed leader of the church quitting, writing a book, and hauling into public view an all-out war within Scientology's ruling family.
I have never met a more competent, a more intelligent, a more tolerant, a more compassionate being.
That is how Tom Cruise describes David Miscavige, the unquestioned leader of Scientology, one of the most controversial new religions on the planet.
It's a story that affects every Scientologist.
Within the church, he is exalted.
Well, thank you very much. It's truly my pleasure to join you.
He holds forth in front of adoring crowds and rubs shoulders with celebrity parishioners such as Cruise, John Travolta, and Kirstie Alley. But among some former members, he is wildly controversial.
He uses that power to hurt people.
We were hoping to talk to David Miscavige if he's here tonight.
I don't think that'll be possible, and today he's going to be very busy.
Miscavige is famously press shy.
I'm sorry? It's not going to be cool to be set up out here this afternoon.
His last live television interview nearly 25 years ago, right here on Nightline.
If I may just interrupt for a moment, you realize there's a little bit of a problem in getting people to talk critically about the Church of Scientology, because quite frankly, they're scared.
Oh, no.
But tonight, new claims about the secretive world of Scientology and the man at its center.
Let's face it, Scientologists have not been treated like members of other religions, ever.
from an unusual source.
So you spent 12 years right here on the street?
12 years right here, yeah.
Good memories here?
Pretty good memories.
Ron Miscavige, David Miscavige's father, has left the church and is speaking out for the first time exclusively to ABC News.
You have written a whole book about your son, and you've called the book Ruthless.
Yeah.
It's a pretty damning charge to level against your own child.
He wasn't always that way.
Ron Miscavige says he's written this book because of a Scientology policy called disconnection, which he says has torn his family and many others apart.
I raised him, good or bad, and to come to this, what the hell is this? This is nuts.
The church says Ron's book, co-written by a former church member who's now a noted critic of church management, is filled with half-truths and outright lies.
It's, in my view, a literary forgery.
Scientology granting us a rare interview with attorney for the church, Monique Yingling.
What has David Miscavige's response been to this book?
I think he's, on a personal level, I think he's probably very, very sad that his father would do this. There seems to be no explanation except that his father is trying to make a buck off of his name.
While the church is attacking him, Ron is getting support from a prominent voice.
I'm gonna get there first.
Leah Remini, former star of The King of Queens, who also left the church and wrote a book called Troublemaker.
Hey. Oh, you look like $1 million bucks. It's great seeing you, I'll tell you.
How are you?
Good. You're getting better looking, you know that?
So the two of you guys haven't seen each other since you were both active Scientologists.
That's right, yeah.
He has a right to tell his story. I have a right to tell my story, and so do thousands of others.
This unusual family history and subsequent family feud is set in motion in 1968 when Ron, a father of 4, a salesman, and aspiring musician, starts dabbling in Scientology after learning about the new religion founded by science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard at a business meeting.
There are certain evils in society which definitely should cease, and we are taking some responsibility for them.
He says Scientology works wonders for him.
Look, I didn't know what I was looking for. I knew I was looking for something. And when I got in Scientology, I felt that I found what I was looking for, which did have a lot of answers to life on a basic level.
So many answers, so many life-changing benefits, Ron feels a duty as a parent to introduce his son David to Scientology as well. He hopes that somehow auditing, a sort of counseling that uses a Scientology device called an e-meter, can help 9-year-old David with his asthma. And after his first session,
about 45 minutes later, David walks out, smiling, bright. That's what happened. He says, Dad, it's handled.
So your view at the time was that his asthma was cured by Scientology?
Let's put it this way, it mitigated it considerably. I think it was at that moment that he decided he's going to do something with this.
So you think that was the key turning point in his whole life?
I know it.
At age 16, David Miscavige joins the Sea Org, the religious order of the church, and develops a close relationship with church founder L. Ron Hubbard. In 1986, when Hubbard dies, David takes control, taking the title chairman of the board. By this time, David's father, Ron, has also joined the Sea Org. Pretty quickly, Ron says he notices his son's sharp-edged new management style.
David is backstage, literally tearing me apart verbally for 55 minutes. Cursing, yelling, screaming at me.
One night at a church event in the late 1980s where Ron is performing, he says David gives him an extended tongue lashing with other people looking on.
When he's screaming at you, do you ever think, I changed this guy's diapers?
No kidding. Of course I did. Of course I did. And that isn't the only time it happened.
As the years go on, Ron says life for Sea Org members deteriorates. He chafes at what he describes as crushing workloads, restrictive rules, constant stress, a rigid lifestyle, and a lack of sleep.
As time went on, it slowly went downhill, and it got worse and worse and worse.
The church rejects those claims, telling us long and hard hours and a restrictive lifestyle are part of the mission Sea Org members sign on for.
If you talk to the staff, they'll tell you it's the workers' paradise. It couldn't be a better place to work. These are people that have dedicated their lives to something that they really believe in. They believe that Scientology can really help mankind and the world in general, and they're working very hard at that.
As for Ron,
he was working with first-class musicians in one of the best studios in the world. He had nothing to complain about.
My name is Peter Schless. I'm a songwriter.
the church sent us video testimonials from Ron's former bandmates.
Ron was an embarrassment to me, personally.
And also letters in which those bandmates call Ron lazy and crude, say he used racial and ethnic slurs, was a poor musician, and a disgusting pig.
Do you know of any other church that criticizes former members in the way in which Scientology does?
Well, I think it all depends on the circumstances. Certainly, you see that happen with respect to the Vatican and so on. When the Vatican gets attacked, I mean, they have something to say about the attackers.
If somebody leaves the Catholic Church, do you really think they're going to be on the receiving end of this level of vitriol?
Not if they leave the church and they go off and live their life.
No, I mean,
but
if they leave and criticize it, because people leave and criticize the Catholic Church all the time.
Yes, exactly. And I do think that if people in the church are asked for their opinion of this particular person, that you may well get the same kind of criticism.
But it's not as if the people were just randomly asked. This is the church itself asking its parishioners, videotaping it, and giving it to ABC News.
Well, again, the facts are what they are.
Ron says the facts are that by 2012, he can no longer bear life in the Sea Org. So, along with his wife, Becky, who he married after divorcing David's mother, he makes a radical move. He quits. When Leah Remini hears that Ron, the chairman of the board's father, has left, she reaches out.
I tracked him down. I called him, and I offered my support immediately, because I know he must have felt alone when leaving, and I just wanted him to know that we were willing to take them in.
That's a big offer. What made you feel motivated to do that?
Because there is no, there really is no place for them to go unless they have family, which is very rare outside of the church.
But Ron says quitting the church creates a whole new host of profound problems for him. Coming up, it's father versus son, as Ron's departure exposes deep familial rifts, now erupting into public view.
I've never met some of my great-grandchildren. I don't even know how many there are. That is terrible, okay? That's why I'm doing this.
Stay with us.
Well, we can't stay with them.
This special edition of Nightline will continue.
But you can watch it online. ABC News Nightline did a special edition for this. This is just the tip of the iceberg. You know, David Miscavige's father, you know, is, this is a story that came out in the mid-90s, right in the Clearwater headquarters, that building I showed you. Now, my wife and I lived in Dunedin, Florida for about a year. We were just a few miles away from this headquarters. By this time, we had moved back north. Lisa Mcpherson was a woman who was a very dedicated Scientologist, and one day she turns up outside looking bewildered, looking in great distress, barely communicative. Was she on drugs? What's going on? She was very much afraid. People were after her, and sure enough, some Scientology people came and said, "Don't worry, we can take care of her." And they whisked her away, and the next thing you know, she's having some kind of a seizure. She was taken, there was a hospital just a very short distance away. They don't take her to that one. She's unconscious, non-responsive. They take her to a hospital, I forget how many miles north, the distance between Clearwater and Newport Richey, Florida. I know I've driven it, so I know it's like at least a half hour to get up there. And the reason they take her there is because there's a Scientology doctor there, and she's declared dead. This appears to be a case of somebody trying to leave Scientology and not being allowed to. This is probably the most severe example of this, I think. I don't know of any other case where the person trying to escape ended up dead, and of course I am assuming that that's what happened because everybody else pretty much believes that's what happened. Her family believed. They filed suit in 1997. I remember seeing them interviewed. For some reason in 2004, I remember when this hit the news that they settled. We don't know the amounts or the terms of the settlement. Obviously, it involved some kind of agreement to be silent on the part of the family. I'm not saying that this is typical, but I'm saying this is a result of their teaching and practices. This can be traced. This is my opinion. A lot of what you see in this group is very typical. This policy called disconnect. Just about every cult has something. It's basically a shunning policy. When Ronald Enroth wrote his book, Churches That Abuse, he identified 5 major features of spiritual abuse, and the last one was painful exit process. They don't make leaving easy. I know this from personal experience. My departure from my group was made as difficult as possible by my ex-leader. Letters went to my pastor. Letters went to a friend of mine. Now that's mild. That's small potatoes compared to what some of these groups do. But it involved trying to wreck my reputation. Well, in this group, they will try to take away your reputation, your career, your family. They try to basically leave you desperate. We saw this when we talked about the fellow named, he went by the name Father Divine, and how one person who was very close to his inner circle tried to leave, and she didn't do too well on the outside, and to come back, she had to totally humiliate herself before everybody. So there was a painful re-entry process, and I can testify that happens too in these groups. So, questions, thoughts, comments? Yes? Well, as I understand it, they're paid a small allowance. But what does Scientology do to make more money, or what do they do? Yeah, so in other words, some of these people though are there to work, and maybe, I don't know what all their different circumstances are, but they're working for the cult. They're not working whatever job, so I assume they don't have a source of income anymore, so they'll get some kind of a small stipend from the church. And this is where some of the claims of unfair labor practices have come in on the part of ex-members of the Sea Org in particular. So, does that help? In other words, I'm not really an expert on Scientology. I've had very little contact with them. I have had some, but they're trying to sell me something every time. Yes.
We saw Leah on TV. There was whole weeks of exposing them, and they were told to sell their houses to pay and go up, and to get money from their families. They had to get the money however they could get the money. They were ruthless. Just get it from everybody you know. If you want to, don't hire in this thing.
Yeah. So you can imagine, I've had people ask me, both of the group I was in, as well as cults in general, don't you have to be, rather kind of dim-witted to be part of this? Don't you have to be rather, don't these groups prey on uneducated people? I said, no, we had a PhD in our group. We had at least 2 people with master's degrees. No, and other remarks include, don't you have to be very weak-willed? No, some of the strongest-willed people I've ever met have been involved in cults. In fact, you have to have a very strong will to be able to say, I'm not going to talk to my family anymore. that is something I've seen. I saw someone in my group waver back and forth, until he finally, you know, cut off ties. Yeah. And thankfully, his father lived long enough so that when he left, he was able to reconcile with his parents. His mother's still alive. So it has nothing to do with being weak-willed. It has nothing to do with being unintelligent. It has to do with, you know, obviously, you know, if you walk in the door and the first thing they tell you is that, I don't know, 65 million years ago, there were these aliens who dropped humans into a volcano. Right away, you're probably going to turn around and leave. But if they've gotten you to a point where now you're at this higher level or whatever, deeper level, and they've gotten you to spend a couple of $100,000. And now they introduce you to you brace yourself, I'm going to tell you the real thing that's going on in your life. You've got a Thetan living in you who's really upset about something that happened 65 million years ago in a volcano. You know, it sounds silly, but you've been groomed for that for years. And they know from experience that they can tell you that, and you'll buy into that now. So.
From 40,000 feet over New Mexico, you can see they spent all this money. They built this huge alien landing pad. I think that after the apocalypse or something,
This is a Scientology thing. I guess I'd rather have them waste their money on that than use it on something more destructive. It is bizarre. It is, yeah. Now we're talking. This is, I don't know, the major league of abusive cults, you know. But the same kind of abuse happens at lower levels, you might say more tolerable levels in other groups like the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses and so on. And that can make it even worse because it doesn't look nearly as bad. So people will endure it, put up with it for a longer period of time. So you're saying there's an alien landing pad in New Mexico that you've seen. Okay. It's not Area 51, right? Okay. Okay. Maybe the Nation of Islam will use it one day because they're expecting aliens too. Yes.
Did you hear, or in your studies there, that Miscavige's life disappeared?
Yeah, I have heard. Yeah, nobody's seen her in a while, and every once in a while they have to make a statement, you know.
They think that he murdered her, but they don't think that. Everybody else thinks that, who was close to her, and all of a sudden she was just gone.
Now, I don't know if the latest is that somebody claimed to see her. I think usually they bring out somebody who says, "Oh, I just saw her yesterday" or something. But I don't know that they've produced her.
He's really, his temper is really, really bad.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. It's after 7. I guess we could ask more questions. Not that I necessarily, you might know more than I do if you've watched more of these TV specials. Let's pray. Father, this reminds us of just how evil Satan really is and just how depraved we are in ways that we can be led so terribly astray. And it's not about gullibility, but it is about how the God of this world, as Paul writes, blinds us to the truth, blinds very intelligent people to your word, and sometimes even goes so far as to blind them to things that just seem like common sense to so many people. Father, we are tempted sometimes when we hear about some of these evils to be like the psalmists who wrote the imprecatory psalms and were willing to bring down curses upon the evildoers, and sometimes maybe that is appropriate. But we do know that so many of the people involved are victims, they are deceived, and so we do pray for them, and we ask you to give us patience and compassion for them should we come across them. In Jesus' name, amen.